Transportation, mobility, getting around, it all affects the economy. It all affects our quality of life here, certainly in South Florida. So to continue the conversation here at the Florida Priority Summit, please welcome to the stage our panel to continue our conversation on smart cities, innovative travel, 5G, and the political drive to make it happen. Our conversation leader is Raul Moas, the Miami Program Director of the Knight Foundation. Raul and panelists, come on up, please. Sure thing. Hi, good afternoon. Hey, Raul. Sure thing. Appreciate that.
So I get this good center seat.
Yeah, it looks like it.
There you go. You're in the hot seat, Carlos.
I'm in the hot seat.
There you go. Folks, really great to be with you, and thank you for having all of us. So Senator and Kim set the conversation up beautifully for all of us, so I think this would be actually really a natural and easy kind of continuation of that. We wanted to focus our conversation today around the kind of the intersection of somewhat of myth and reality and trust and political will. There's an almost mythical nature to a lot of the AV conversations that are happening, both in terms of ability and capabilities and timelines for deployment, as well as a trust issue, right? Conversation last week was, well, if an AV identifies a dog or a grandmother on the street, has to kill one of them, how does it choose the ethics around the AI behind AV? And then also the question of trust in the public. How does the public trust not only the technology, but elected officials, local government, in terms of implementing transportation and mobility solutions for our communities? And so let's dive right in. Alex, could you give us a little bit of insight in terms of why Ford, with its AV partner, is in Miami, what they're doing, and what does that mean for the everyday Miamian?
Sure. So as a brief introduction, Alex Buznego. I am the Miami Market Manager for Ford Autonomous Vehicles, LLC. And I guess to give a little background, Ford's objective is to deploy and scale autonomous vehicle commercial services in multiple markets in 2021, including Miami. Miami was announced back in February as the first city where we would deploy our on-road testing, and also in parallel to developing the technology, developing the business side, working with partners like Domino's and Postmates, local businesses like dry cleaners and florists, to deliver food, goods, and other items in addition to moving people. Why Miami? So I think there were a lot of reasons. One, compared to Detroit, I think it definitely got a lot of people's attention. But more seriously, I think climate did play a role in allowing for year-round testing, and a very, I guess, progressive local leadership, both at county and at the state, was a big part of it as well.
What does it mean for the average resident before 2021?
So before 2021, we're actively on the roads with autonomous vehicles. There's a safety driver, two of them actually in the front seat. They are driving both to map the city and also to refine and perfect the technology. We've worked really closely with Carlos and his team at Miami-Dade County to make sure that safety is the top priority. So these vehicles have been tested extensively in simulation on test tracks before being deemed road safe. And even then, like I said, we have the safety drivers. The vehicles are clearly branded. We've worked with local government and law enforcement to kind of understand, everyone understands that these vehicles, what they can do and what they can't. On the business side, we have vehicles that we're using to deliver Domino's and Postmates, like I said. Those vehicles are not autonomous. They're being driven in manual mode, but we are simulating AV conditions so as to learn about user experience, learn about the human element that goes into what these services are going to look like, because they're going to be very different. And I guess to sum it up, as a Miamian, I'm really proud and excited that Ford chose Miami to pilot a lot of this work, and we're learning a lot. We've learned a lot so far.
Marta, you recently produced a transit scorecard, essentially, right? Giving letter grades to the different elements of our mobility infrastructure in the 305. How does, and we just heard the senator kind of mention the idea of an all options are on the table approach to addressing transit and mobility challenges and opportunities. how does AV play into this in the short to near term? Like, ground us in terms of reality. We're hearing conversations on this is happening faster than cities expect, and we have some really kind of aggressive timetables that within 10 years, there's going to be massive fleets of automated kind of transit on the road. What does it actually look like on the ground for the next 5-10 years, and how does it fit into the bigger picture of transit?
Sure, that's a great question. So Marta Viciedo, I'm the co-founder of Urban Impact Lab and also the founder of Transit Alliance Miami. The scorecard that he's referring to came out of Transit Alliance Miami. It's an organization that we have incubated out of Urban Impact Lab. This is one of the things that we do. So that's a complex question, and I will start by saying I wish I had talked to you first before getting involved in transportation advocacy, because I would have taken a little bit of notes on just how political this whole world is. Perhaps it would have been a different route. So regarding right now, and regarding AV technology, my lens is very hyper-focused on Miami-Dade County, so I don't think I could expertly speak to a broader location. But I know in Miami-Dade County, we have all of these really interesting dynamics happening. We're really building a solid entrepreneurial startup ecosystem. Our tech is really building, and we're making great strides in that. But at the same time, our community is also, particularly the city of Miami, is one of the most impoverished. So we have this really interesting dichotomy happening within our community that needs to be addressed. And the reason I bring that up is because in somewhere like 2015, a Harvard study, and it's been an ongoing study, cited that transportation, specifically the time to commute from one place to another, is the #1 indicator of somebody escaping poverty. So when you're in a community that has these dynamics that really need to be addressed, and you're leading on this technology end, you have to find a balance. And I think that that's where the answer lies. The answer is not all AV or all buses and trains. As a matter of fact, Transit Alliance at this point is not advocating for trains at all because of the significant amount of cost that it takes to build trains, significant investment, and the land use component that is so critical that has to go along to make great transit work. You need lots of people to make great transit work. You can't build trains out to nowhere and expect it to succeed. So right now, I think the most important thing that we can do in this county is drive improvements where they make sense. For instance, one of the projects that we're working on, we're hoping to redesign the bus system. Buses are super unsexy. I get it. You're like, oh my God, buses. We're going to talk about buses. Nobody wants to take a bus. I understand. But in Miami-Dade County, 2 out of 3 rides are on the bus. So that means that is the #1 place where we can have really quick improvement in terms of getting people from one place to another. Can they be sitting in traffic with the rest of everybody else? Absolutely not. They can't be behind Uber. They can't be behind the Ford cars that I see driving around downtown all the time. But we have to make improvements whereby we can mobilize our community. We can give them opportunities and access. I think that that's exactly where we need to be looking at for the near term. And certainly AV plays a role in it. AV plays a role in buses or other larger vehicles that can carry 40, 50, 60 people. That's really important. So I think it's just a balance and making sure. See, here's the thing. Technology is moving exponentially faster. We all know that. But in a community like ours, when technology is moving so quick and there are people that are kind of being left behind, they're being left behind exponentially further. And so our concern is people and communities. We love cities. We love thriving, prosperous places for everybody. And that's where we really see technology and transportation meeting that need.
Carlos, we didn't mean to put you in the hot seat, but since you're there, we're going to take advantage of it.
I'm here, yes.
So you're at a particularly interesting junction. You're not an elected official. You're a civil servant with Dade County, and you're working heavily in transit, which I'll let you share about now. You could forgive a resident of Miami-Dade County for being confused as to what the transportation and mobility priorities are of elected leadership. On the one hand, you've teamed up with Ford, for example, to produce the Cities of Tomorrow Challenge, looking for innovative solutions from community, from the places that need them to address these needs. On the other hand, the county TPO just voted to forego extending rail down the South Corridor, which had been promised to residents back when the half-penny tax was implemented, and instead, to Marta's point, invest in bus rapid transit because it's more cost-effective. And that, for some folks, especially in that area, eroded trust and confidence in the county's ability to execute on a grander vision or a grander plan. So for the average Joe, particularly those down south who don't feel they have a viable mobile transit or mobility option other than US 1, how should they kind of read the signals? How should they understand what's happening? And what would you point to say, this is important to us, and these are the steps we're taking because we hear you. We know this is really important.
Yeah. So I'm going to need more time than the one.
You got 17 minutes, man.
To really answer that. So Carlos Cruz-Casas, I'm Assistant Director at the Department of Transportation and Public Works, which is to me is a long and ugly name that doesn't do justice what we do, right? I like to consider ourselves as a mobility management agency because we don't only manage transit, but traffic signals and signs, highway design, engineering, and bicycle pedestrian, and even that for-hire vehicle arm. To your point before, I'm going to start thinking and say, for us, more transit is better transit. And the key is that we need to redefine how we talk about public transport. Right? I would argue that before it was just bus and rail, and today can be bus and rail plus everything else that can connect people to opportunities. And we heard from Senator Brandes about things are changing and we need to change with it. And the role of public transportation agencies should be more of a mobility facilitator, a convener of trips, rather than just a solely public transportation provider. With that in mind, yes, we are looking forward to how to bring solutions to the ground. You talk about the South Day Transitway, for example, and trust. From our point of view, there's no way to better get the trust back into our leadership than get something going, built in operations. That's something that we see, and the fastest that we can get that going, and we start getting that feedback and that trust back. I don't want to say that we forego completely the rail, as the station is going to be built for bus rapid transit in a way that can be retrofitted into a rail in the future, if that makes sense, when the ridership comes back up. Like Marta mentioned, we need really a dense population with the critical mass going the same direction at the same time in order to justify that high capacity. But when it's done properly, it's done right, bus rapid transit works. You know, it's hard for us to kind of think about bus rapid transit and talk about the transitway when it has not been operating as bus rapid transit for the last 30 years, right? It's an exclusive facility, but not until earlier this year, the signals were not given priority to transit. So for the first time, we actually put technology in place meant to manage cars to actually get the bus and the priority for buses. And we were able, with limited intervention, to reduce the travel time from someone coming all the way down from Florida City to Dayland from 67 minutes to 50 minutes. That to me is a quick opportunity to show we can do better, and we will. And not necessarily have to be this big project, but there's things that we can do today. And I think that's our approach is we're working together with Transit Alliance, open to start looking deeply into the network that we have, how we can maximize the use of our resources, understanding that equity and equality are different things. Doesn't mean that we need to serve the entire county with the same service, but with the same level of service, yes. And there's different ways for us to achieve that. And I think that's really an approach, and we really hope, you know, I think there's a lot coming on in the next couple of years, the network redesign, the new buses in place, the new rail coming in, more reliability into our system, and particularly making sure that we make the best use of our resources to carry the most amount of people with the limited numbers of vehicles that we have today. Yeah.
Patrick, so Brightline is the first privately funded and run and owned intercity rail system in the US in 50 years, right? First one in 50 years of this kind. And we're talking about extending it to Orlando. We're talking about extending it between Orlando and Tampa now as well, along I-4. What has that process been like very quickly? And more importantly, what signal has that sent out there to the market, not just in the state of Florida, nationally, as to the direction that private funds and private players have to play or will play in mobility of that kind?
Thanks. So my name is Patrick Goddard. I'm the president of Brightline. We started operating in January. We extended to Miami in May. We're servicing Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm with a plan to expand to Orlando, eventually to Tampa.
You know, it's been an interesting conversation, and listening to the senator earlier, transportation is an organism, and there's lots of different components to it, and everybody plays a different role. And also the composition of the city, the demographics of the city, the density, you know, the urbanization factor versus, you know, people living in the suburbs versus city centers, they all play factors in how that organism needs to function. We think that Brightline's role in the context of all of that at a national level is to connect cities. So we're, you know, as you correctly defined us, an intercity passenger rail system. We're connecting cities to cities. And the distinction, and the reason why we're interested in that business is because we can make money in that business. So as a private entity, you know, and there's lots of examples around the world and in Europe of how intercity passenger rail makes money. You can look at Virgin Trains, Italo, in Italy, Eurostar connecting London and Paris and other cities now. And there's a myriad of others in Europe and Asia that are profitable. They're profitable because, you know, unlike light rail and commuter rail systems, as you see in most city centers, whereby you've got a lot of stops, you need a lot of rolling stock, you need a lot of employees, and you have to have artificially subsidized fares. We're able to have less stations, less rolling stock, less employees, further, you know, distances between the stations, and we can charge more like airline fares. So we're able to make money doing that, and we think there's a place for us in the country to connect densely populated hubs. We then believe it's the job of both private and public entities to make the sub-hub work. And that's where, you know, I agree that within an urban area, particularly Miami, where we're still figuring out who we are and developing, and very much, you know, there's a lot of development to be done in Miami, particularly as it relates to the urban core and the surrounding suburbs. It wouldn't be smart to do more rail or to do light rail, because, like, it's difficult, it's expensive to do it, and, you know, you can't change your mind about it later without it costing like tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. So the notion of doing kind of people movers, I love bus rapid transit if we can figure out how to do it properly. And by the way, that is an important factor. You know, the actual experience for people is important. If there's strange people and it smells bad, people mightn't take it. You know, if it's well managed and well controlled, and, you know, there's a way for paying passengers to have a waiting area where they feel safe and secure, and, you know, hopefully air conditioned or at least in the shade, that they can board a bus, people will start thinking about taking a bus. So I'm a big proponent of bus rapid transit. I think that's what belongs on the busway in South Miami, you know, connecting to the Metro Rail station. I think the city and the county have made improvements and made efforts towards that end in terms of the signalization, the upgrade of the rolling stock on Metro Rail, et cetera. Those are all great things. Automated vehicles, there's a place for them. Rideshare, there's a place for them. Scooters and bikes, the micro-mobility, as the senator, the term he used, there's a place for all of that. So you know, our view is there's a place for private money in the fabric of transportation in this country, and there's a place for public money in the fabric of our country's transportation network. And I think that's the conversation that we should all be having as it relates to how we interface with one another. And that's both, you know, obviously we'll do it. We're doing intercity stuff, but there's lots of private companies, you know, like Lime and Bird and Spin and Jump and all these folks who are doing handling the micro mobility piece too. So it's really a matter of both private and public entities getting together and figuring out how to solve the mobility problems in each market.
Marta, so it definitely feels like transit is getting much more attention these days. There's consensus that this is a challenge. There's also general consensus that we're going to try a lot of different things and prioritize this work. Are we set up to handle that interest and that kind of level of investment? Is our structures around civic and elected kind of offices set up that way? In short, do we have too many cooks in the kitchen? We have an MDX, we have a TPO. I'd love Marta to kind of comment on are we set up from a framework perspective of elected officials and appointed officials to manage this well? Or are there other models out there of metro areas that perhaps have also 30-something municipalities inside of them and a large portion of unincorporated areas, et cetera, et cetera. Are there other models of how to set this up that are more efficient in managing regional transportation?
Sure. I'm a big proponent that everything is possible. It
Yep.
gets me into all sorts of trouble all the time, but I do think everything is possible. But what you're alluding to is a significant challenge. Just as a really quick overview, Miami-Dade County is a pretty big place, but we have 35 cities inside of Miami-Dade counties. That means 35 mayors. That means, well, 36 if you count the county mayor. Lots of commissioners, lots of interests, lots of different people making decisions on transit, and those are just elected officials. You mentioned the Miami-Dade Expressway Authority, the transportation, so lots of different, Carlos's agency with Public Works. There's so many people making decisions that sometimes it is at a hindrance. And so the way that it plays out sometimes with the scooters is a good example. The city of Miami will have a contract with Bird, with a particular scooter provider. The city of South Miami will have a contract with, well, let's not use the city of South Miami. Let's just say Coral Gables will have the contract with Lime. Now, anybody in the room know exactly where the boundary for the city of Miami and the city of Coral, where exactly they interface, where that cutoff is? Anybody in the room? Some of you might, a couple of you do, but not very many. So when we're looking at transportation, we really need to create it needs to be one system that is very usable. Patrick talked about the experience. That is so important. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what background you're comfortable with, background you're coming from. An experience is an experience, and a high quality experience, a comfortable experience will change how you behave. So when we're talking about like this fragmented system and you have 25 different trolleys in Miami-Dade County, plus the bus, plus the train, plus Lime and Bird and all of these different services, it becomes a little bit difficult to navigate. It becomes difficult to understand how to get around from one place to another. There are some models externally, like in other places where it does work better. Some places we don't have a transit authority. Cities like New York and Boston and Chicago, they have an authority. There's a person that manages transit. Here we have a department which is under the mayor and the commissioners. All of our decisions are siphoned, are very political, extremely political. So there's lots of ways to change it, and we're very hopeful that that can be changed. But I think that is where private and public still, again, come together, as Patrick was talking about. We need the business sector to talk about how transportation is important to our economic growth, and it certainly is. We need developers to be saying, you know what, transit actually adds value to my development. It's not something I need to turn my back at or build on the side. It's something that adds value to my new development. And the community-based organizations that certainly can advocate for these changes, and people to come together and make sure that we can build a structure, a legislative structure that makes sense for decision making.
Is that up for the voters to do or undo?
Yes, particularly when it comes to changing the structure, yes. But our community we passed the half-penny surtax, over a decade ago. That happened. We're able to mobilize around these things, and I think now more than ever, everybody is feeling the push for it.
Carlos, what are the 2-3 things that you're most excited about that are kind of really cost-effective and lightweight to implement, relatively speaking? That's not rail, right? That will have a disproportionately positive, beneficial impact in mobility in Dade County. Are there things in the next 24, 36 months that we should look forward to because they're actionable, that you can implement them, and they'll have a really big benefit to what's happening?
So there's a lot going on. I think, we see a lot of private sector mobility solutions out there, and we often talk what they can do, but we don't often talk about what transit system can learn from it. Yeah. Right, so there's an opportunity for us to become more efficient with our circulator routes, the trolleys and our circulator routes, to bring them an on-demand transit service that can actually be hailed the same way that you would hail an Uber Pool, a Lyft line, or some of the others. To me, that's a great opportunity for us to provide a better service with less resources, right? So it's something that we're going to start seeing and actually looking at demonstrating the benefit of it over the next 12 months. So we're going to start hopefully issuing that RFP out. We talk about about the organizations and the different legislation and decision making, but at the same time, we need to talk about how we provide all these mobility solutions into one single panel for people to actually access them. So what we're going to be looking into, we've already developed a open architecture in the back end to integrate with private mobility solutions for us to be able to provide an opportunity for people to plan, book, and pay for the multimodal journey. At the same time, we're going to be releasing the APIs for companies like Ubers and Lyft and Brightline to be able to sell a transit ticket. For us, is how we can actually eliminate the hurdle for people using transit. And micromobility, we're going to take a big stand on that. I think there is something that we see the benefit of it. And like Marta said, we cannot allow for picking winners and losers by different entities. The thing that the Senator mentioned about we need to allow this service to be out there as a mobility solution and then work through a permit process to make sure that we don't have bad actors out there, but not to pick and have an agreement with a single company. Those are, again, off the top of my head, I have another 15 that I can share. I'm really excited about the next 2 years. Those are going to be big for us as we actually start getting some improvements on the ground.
And I'll give you kudos. I added my Easy Card to the app the other day. Used it to get in and out really easily. Yeah. I think people underestimate just how important that user experience is that Marta was talking about. I took the Brightline up to West Palm a few weeks back, and it wasn't so much that, to be very honest, it wasn't so much that it was new and it was kind of shiny in some ways because it was new. It was the personal attention that every single employee at Brightline was concerned about my experience, right? And so I think that the takeaway for me at least was across all these kind of things is that increasingly it's about making sure that people find it attractive and comfortable and less frictionful, more frictionless as part of their everyday. Yeah. We have time, thankfully, for a few questions. I know Kim is kind of taking them in online over there, and she'll be kind of QBing, I think, a couple of questions for our panelists.
I've got a bunch of questions here that came in from the audience. I'll tell you guys that the environment panel has 100 questions in front of them, so come on. All right, so the first one, how do you see the self-driving vehicles affecting the job market, as many people rely on driving Uber to provide for themselves?
That's a big one also because I'd add just because of the makeup of the demographic here in Miami. A lot of folks kind of...
Do you want to tackle that, or my 2 cents?
Yeah,
so real quick, you talk about experience, right? So what I think is we're going to start seeing a migration into different employments and needs, right? What I would love to see is more ambassador likes and experience and having people be participant in public transportation, be participant on that engagement with the AV community and actually fill that gap between technology and the vehicle. Right. So to me, there is a transition of the jobs, not a loss of them, a transition into a different approach.
Alex, how do you guys view some of that?
Yeah, we understand and respect those concerns are very real. Automation has had an impact on the job market in many areas, and part of the reason that we're coming in to Miami with a 3-year head start is to study the impact of that in other areas. But to the point of customer experience, our belief is that there will be a human touch that is required to make the experience what we want it to be. We're taking a human-centric design approach to what our vehicle looks like, to what our app looks like, to what the experience looks like. And while autonomous vehicles may be able to shift and displace some aspects of human behavior, it in all likelihood will not be across the board.
Why does 1 mile of track cost $100 million?
Doesn't cost me $100 million. So I don't know. You want to answer that one?
I love Marta and Patrick and Carlos as well.
Doesn't cost me $100 million.
So exactly. So the question is, ground level track or elevated, right? And there's a lot of infrastructure need to be put in place where you have it elevated, a lot of communication that we use different than you use in terms of the short distance for safety for the trains. There's a lot to it. Plus the station level, you can do, of course, the Miami Central is a big one, but for commuter rail, you can do something very light. For a heavy rail, you still have a little bit more infrastructure to it, but that's, again, just more details.
It does depend on whether you're at grade, above grade, below grade. At grade is far more cost effective. It's about 1/5 of that, you're talking more like $15 to $20 million. But once you elevate, you're basically building a bridge and bridges are expensive. And when you dig a tunnel, they're even more expensive. So it just depends on where you're doing. But a lot of light rail ends up needing to be elevated because you don't have the right-of-way.
Sure.
Right-of-way is key. We've had right-of-way. We've either gone along existing railroads or on highways.
Yep.
We have a long question, but it's an important one, so I'm going to read the entire thing. There's a transportation equity issue for parents in Miami-Dade, where schools of choice and magnets offer students great opportunities, but no transportation. This limits these amazing opportunities to families that have the means to drive their kids to school or pay private transportation companies. Are there any family-centric plans to enhance safe transportation for children and youth?
Marta, is there anything out there on the landscape, on the horizon?
The ones I have heard about are things that are like similar to Uber, that their services, they are sort of private, it's cheaper,
Yeah.
but they are Uber-like,
Sure.
that you can purchase a ride for your child to school or to after-school activities. They have had some trouble with regulation, with getting the appropriate permits that they need. So I don't know exactly where they are in the system of being able to be viable, but that's out there.
So on that, I think I would say stay tuned. Tomorrow we have the finale event for the City of Tomorrow Challenge that we work very closely with the Knight Foundation and for. So many of those solutions presented were about that particular topic about not only have the Uber-like service for kids, but how about getting parents to carpool into one direction and then going into work. So there is again, it's not about technology, it's how we want to live and what we want to achieve in our lives here, and then match that. So stay tuned. Tomorrow will be a great event, and we're going to be talking about some of those solutions as well.
I'd like to stay on the topic of equity and access. Patrick, loved my experience on the Bright Line. I can afford a $10, $15 ticket kind of one way on a one-off when it's a business trip or of the sorts. Folks that are commuting every day in services industry specifically wouldn't do that. Is there any kind of thing that you guys are envisioning to address that market need?
Yeah, we actually have a commuter product. That is, so just to put it in context for you, if you drove your car, and most people don't know this, but let's imagine for a second you have a $500 a month car payment and your insurance is $200 a month. Driving to Palm Beach with tolls, gas, and your car payment, it costs you about 80 cents a mile to drive your car to Palm Beach, and it takes you 2 hours. Our pricing is about 45 cents a mile right now, but it's 67 miles. Get an Uber or a Lyft there, it'll cost you $80 to $100. So we're still half the cost of rideshare. We're still less than what it would cost you to actually drive your own car. And then for those folks who are doing it on a daily basis, there are monthly passes in the kind of $500 a month type of range for our guests who are getting between those cities on a regular basis.
Well, last one from me. For Carlos, Marta mentioned the politicization of public transit. This is a universal issue. How can we depoliticize it and get the entire county to get together for things like bus rapid transit?
That is a great question. So there is a big push we're going to do for next year is trying to do a Buznego redesign. We need to make sure that everyone has a voice at the table. We're going to be a lot of public outreach and engagement. The idea is let's make sure that we design a service that can meet the needs for most of our community out there, that we maximize the use of the resources, and then now with other transportation modes, that we'll be able to cover that transit desert that we have. We need more of the people on all the different spectrum to be participating in the conversation. I think that's something that Transit Alliance will do very well, and I would love to really get everyone on board on that one.
Awesome. A huge thanks to each of you for joining us. Thank you. If you can join me in giving them a round of applause.
Yeah.
Thank you, folks.
Raul and the panelists, thank you very much.